I'm happy to introduce Yannis Aesopos. It's part of the policy we developed with the restructuration of the B Pro, the postgraduate program, and now we have new teachers in this program, international teachers. And Yannis is one of them, and of course, because this program around the Mediterranean, cities around the Mediterranean is very important, and he is the main specialist of the city of Athens. Since years, he published 3 books on these subjects, and one very important about the city between 60s to the 90s. And he developed a new strategy of urbanism between local and global, working on the periphery mainly. And he's also an architect, a building architect. Yes, he's an architect diploma in Athens. He worked in Harvard, Princeton, I spoke about the Toulouse, but also he worked with Bernard Tchoumi during 3 years. And of course, you know that Bernard Tchoumi built also a museum in Athens, very important museum. And surely is part of those new architects with two big houses and office building. He's part of those architects who have trained in Europe and also in the United States, and we are in between, which are in between different situations. And surely we can have a very strong overview on humanistic situation in Europe with a new overview and push away old scheme to develop a new human strategy.
Thank you, Frederick. I would like to thank the UCL and Bartlett, and Frederick especially, and also the head of Bartlett, Marcos Cruz, and of course the director of Master Program, and Adrian Lahoud, who gave me the opportunity to be here. I have been, my lecture is called Interpreting Athens, and I have been, as Frederick said, I have been struggling with Athens as my research topic for the last 15 years. Dealing with Athens in the post-war period through the Olympic Games and up to the contemporary situation that has become a kind of interesting international case through the contemporary crisis that is going on. At the same time, I am teaching a studio at the Master in Urban Designs on Athens. So my lecture is called Interpreting Athens, and it will be structured in 3 parts. The first part will be a presentation of the constituent elements of Athens that from the post-war period through the Olympic Games and up to the contemporary condition right now. Then I will try to discuss how this context, in a way, can through abstraction, can become an interesting opportunity to inform a kind of architectural discourse. And the third part will be the presentation of 13 projects, which I have divided in 2 categories, the horizontal projects and the vertical projects, the first being landscape or public spaces, and the second ones being buildings. So we'll start. I have to dim the lights now, I guess. Yeah. Oh, okay. So, is it too dark?
Yeah, a bit too dark.
Yeah, a bit too dark, maybe.
If you could dim them on yours, it's a different setting.
Okay, but there's no screen here now.
Touch it, just touch it. And then press on the left-hand side.
Sorry? Is this okay, or? Yeah. So the first part of the lecture is called Contemporary Athens, from Polykatikia to Urban Diffusion, and this is a kind of Google image of Athens. Athens is the city that is this part here, and it's enclosed by mountains, and to the south reaches the sea. And this is another image of Athens from one of the hills that surround it. And Athens is a product of rapid urbanization process that took place in the post-war decades, especially in the 50s and the 60s. And beyond the built environment, modernization was manifest in all socioeconomic aspects of the city. And I show here some images from a ferry terminal in the port of Piraeus, public buildings, education buildings, a school by Takis Enetos, a kind of prominent figure of the 60s. The Athens Hilton Hotel, private investment in the city, late 50s. And also housing units. This is the Asyrmatos housing unit in Petralona, but also in the private single-family houses that were started to being built up as weekend houses or vacation houses to the south of Athens, near the sea usually, and that incorporated this new extrovert modern architecture and were built for a new class that developed after the war that was extroverted and had wanted to incorporate the understandings of the modern movement. This is Nikos Valsamakis, a house in Navisos, and this is another house by Takis Enetos. Again, you see how modern this house looks, and the interior and exterior seem to be the limit between exterior and interior seems to disappear somehow. In this kind of modernization process, landscape was also a tool of modernizing the country. This is a plan of a project by Dimitris Pikionis, an older figure. He was more operative in the interwar period, but continued working after the war. And it's a kind of famous project. It's the landscaping of the Acropolis and Philopopos Hills. And you can see here it's a kind of mixture of concrete and stone. And this new layer, this new carpet, you would say, is actually penetrated by different elements that pre-existed in the area. So in a way, it sends the message that the new architecture is also a kind of continuation between the past and the present. But of course, all this that we now seem to think that has always been there, all this landscape is actually constructed. And I very much like this image because it shows this beach in Vouliagmeni, where this machine is actually creating a new landscape, an artificial landscape that now, after many years, we think that has always been there. And this is the same beach. That is a very popular beach nowadays. So in a way, the landscape was a vehicle for the development of the tourist industry that became one of the major economic sectors Greece has invested on. Again, tourism and tourist facilities from the 60s. So contemporary Athens presents characteristics that are different from other Western European or North American cities, which are designed and planned to a smaller or larger extent. Its urban landscape subjugates any formal discourse to the search of activities, and Athens is undesigned in many ways, to a large extent, yet remains extremely vivid. The urbanization system that generated the city, based on its most part on antiparochi, and antiparochi means the exchange of land for apartment surface. So if you had a plot of land, you would actually give it to a contractor, and he would actually build a building there, and he would give you back some apartments. So in a way, it was a kind of quid pro quo system that didn't really involve money. And so this urbanization system that was based on antiparochi and on the legal constraints of the general building regulations has proven its operation value and demands a positive, however critical approach. As Frederick already mentioned, I had worked on two books that somehow tried to document this period. The first one, together with my late colleague Giorgos Simeforidis. The first one was called Landscapes of Modernization, Greek Architecture in the 60s and the 90s, and had to do with the architecture of that period, the buildings and the landscape of the landscape project of that period. And the second book that came later was called The Contemporary Greek City, and it was about the city itself. So the city in which all these previous projects that the previous book somehow presented, what this city was about. And I'm now working on finishing a third book, which is called Diffused Athens, and is actually dealing with what happened after the Olympic Games of 2004 and the effect they had, and going up to the recent crisis that we are all witnessing. So, which were the constituent elements of, or conditions of Athens up until the 2004 Olympic Games? The first condition was the polykateikia. Maybe you have become more familiar with the term. And the polykateikia as an urban unit. Athens is actually based on the development and the infinite repetition différente, so repetition in variations, we could say, of the flexible, multi-programmatic building type of the polykateikia, which, if we translate it literally, means multi-dwelling. It's in fact an apartment building and can be considered as the city's urban unit. In fact, the polykateikia is a Greek realization of Le Corbusier's domino system. It's a reinforced steel, reinforced concrete frame made of repetitive slabs that incorporates a staircase and an elevator shaft built by small to medium scale private contractors. And the word private is important because all polykateikias were actually built by private contractors. The state really had nothing to do with all this activity. The polykateikia is a building type that offers simplicity of construction, economy and durability, and can be repeated infinitely if formed the basis for a new vernacular architectural modernity. And by vernacular I mean that it's in a way, it does not require any expertise, so it can be built by nearly any unskilled worker. The program of the polykateikia, though initially prescribed as housing, and remember polykateikia means multi-dwelling, is adapted to its flexible construction system and offers innumerable alternatives in terms of program: housing, office, ministry, store, restaurant, supermarket. In a way, it's a kind of open type, I would say. And you can see this image. It's a kind of ugly building, this example, but it shows the basic structure, of the type, and in fact it shows that the last floor is actually still unfinished. So the type actually incorporates phasing. It could actually be completed in phases once the owner, for example, has the money to build the last floor, or once his daughter gets married and needs more space. Of course, we have exquisite examples of polykateikias. This is one of the famous polykateikias of the 60s by Takis Enetos, the architect that I have already mentioned and showed some of his work previously, where he developed these sliding panels on the facade, which could differentiate the enclosed and open spaces. The balconies could become a kind of enclosed through glass panels. The second condition is the polykateikia, and this is a play of words. In a way, once you repeat this type of the polykateikia, you end up with an intense private urbanization and the construction of a private city. And private is in quotation marks because it actually means that it's a private because it's actually constructed by private contractors and is owned by different individuals. The city produced was indeed based on the small to medium scale of the unit itself and not on any large scale organizing master plans. Public space, in a way, remained a residue of private space. So you can see once you multiply the unit, then you end up with this. And this is Athens. It's a kind of the result of the multiplication or the repetition différente of the polykateikia. The polykateikia has produced a new continuous layer of the artificial that indifferently replaced the pre-existing natural environment. And I like this image because it shows somehow the new carpet or the new layer of the polykateikias that is arriving and replacing the pre-existing natural layer somehow. The third condition is the notion of placeless or continuity. Athens is continuous. The only discontinuity is within the artificial environment of the built are the leftovers of the natural world. Mountains, hills, and large rocks, dried out rivers and creeks, archaeological sites. Natural elements play the role of landmarks. And you can see here, if you make a map somehow, you see that this is the city, and it's a kind of sea of the built, and the remnants of the natural environment are these kind of islands of rocks, hills, and actually elements of nature that were not possible to be built. And this image shows as well the same thing, how this carpet, this new carpet of the artificial, has covered the pre-existing layer of the natural, and has only these holes or these islands where these natural elements appear: rocks, hills, creeks, and archaeological sites. This is the ancient agora, the Athens agora, and you see how the layer of the modern polykatikias is actually approaching and is very close to the ancient site. The fourth condition is the notion of borderless or undesigned public space. And in Athens, with few exceptions that date to the neoclassical urban planning of the Bavarians, and here I show the second actually master plan, the second and final master plan of Athens by a Bavarian planner, Leo von Klenze. There are not really any designed public spaces. Public spaces are the residue of the built environment based on their programmatic density and not on design. And these are some images. The fifth and last condition has to do with formless, or the lack of identity. We all think that Athens is formless, or is kind of ugly city. Most of its inhabitants have this idea about the city. Actually, the macroscopic homogeneity of Athens is deceptive. Its seemingly formless character is actually the inability to recognize and identify a specific and dominating form, which is actually a result of the prevalence of modern abstract architecture, which one cannot really categorize or understand. So, Athens continued to expand in an identical manner through the repetition of the small to medium scale unit of the polykatikia until the works for the preparation of the 2004 Olympic Games began. So when Athens actually was selected to host the Olympic Games, and that was in 1997, this was a crucial day for the urban transformation of the city. Together with several other major infrastructural works funded by the EU that were somehow ongoing at that time, they made up a new infrastructural layer that was placed on top of the existing modern city so as to produce Olympic Athens. So in a way, the Olympic Athens is a kind of overlay of two layers. The one is the layer of the polykatikia, which I explained until now, and the second one is the infrastructural layer of the Olympic Games, which I will explain now. So Olympic Athens 2004, joy. This is the opening ceremony. Which were the main elements that made up Olympic Athens? The first one was airport as instigator. Generic architecture, Venizelos Athens International Airport, where you all arrive if you now travel to Athens, replaced in 1950s Eros Saarinen. You probably have heard of Eros Saarinen. He was a Finnish modernist master. So the new airport replaced the old airport designed by Eros Saarinen in the Hellenikon site to the south of the city, and defined the city's diffusion to the east. So the selection of this airport to the east of the city, outside the Athens basin, outside the enclosed city, enclosed by the mountains, was a kind of signal for the city to sprawl, to expand to the east. But you cannot have an airport without a highway which can lead you there. So Attikiodos was a highway that, in a way, it's a kind of ring road or a periphery, or a peripherique, you could say. It's a highway that bypasses the city center. So the city center of Athens is here, and this highway somehow bypasses the center and connects the airport to the national highway that starts over here. So the new highway supported the city's diffusion into the surrounding Attica region to the west and to the east. And this is the new highway. This is the new infrastructural layer I was talking about before. At the same time, metro networks, Proastiakos, light suburban train and tram networks, these fixed rail networks increased urban mobility and connected to the networks of diffusion. So you can see that all these networks that were produced for the Olympic Games actually expanded dramatically the ability of each one of the citizens of the city to move around, and connected the areas of the city that were until that time completely unconnected. Mobility was maximized in a way. But you cannot really have Olympic Games without an investment in the city center public space, because you have to have a kind of a good city image in order to support consumption and tourism, because tourists will not arrive if you don't have a nice city. So major squares of Athens were redesigned, facades of buildings were facelifted. There was a new archaeological park, a kind of major project that connected the columns of Olympius Zeus, which is down here, on the sketch of the Acropolis, which is here, through the ancient Agora, which is down here, and then down to the Keramikos ancient cemetery. So this is a major project that was done for the Olympic Games. Objects of consumption and culture spring along networks. We have a new huge shopping mall in the center of Athens, housed in a kind of 1930s building, which covers an entire urban block, and a new museum, the Benaki Museum, which is the most prominent and most successful institution of contemporary art in Athens. So all these were done for the Olympic Games, a huge investment of money. Also, you can't have the games if you don't have venues for sports. So numerous Olympic venues were created, a large inventory of extra large buildings and public open air spaces in the city. And as you can see, if the center of Athens is here, all the Olympic venues were spread out in different locations in order to allow for the economic development of the entire area. And Athens is no more Athens, but it's a kind of broader area, which we call Attica. So these are the Olympic Games of Attica, in fact. But in order to have Olympic Games, you also need a symbol. And the new Olympic Stadium roof and the park, which were designed by Santiago Calatrava, produced this landmark. So this is the Olympic Stadium here, and the new roof by Calatrava. And all these development, this arcade here, this velodrome, and all these were designed by Calatrava in order to produce this kind of symbol for the games. After 2004, diffused Athens. What happens after the Olympic Games? That's a big question always. And what we witness in Athens is that several Olympic venues remain still inaccessible. Several Olympic venues were turned into spaces of consumption. So in a way, the buildings for the Olympic Games were an opportunity for new spaces of consumption to appear in the city. And what we witness in the post-Olympic period is actually a huge increase in consumerism in Athens and in Greece in general, which had to do with the cheap money and the loans that the banks provided each citizen, which of course later on were not possible to pay them off. So spaces of consumption springing along the new networks, and you see here, this is Attiki Odos, I mentioned, the ring road, and you see how many shopping malls, of large-scale shopping malls, spring along this network. And new mobility is actually associated with extra large-scale consumption. So the networks actually provide the ability for the construction of a new consumerist and the development of a new consumerist culture. At the same time, the city center public space deteriorates, increasing illegal immigrant population, social exclusion and poverty, and drugs appear. And this is a very interesting image. It's the Academy of Athens. It's the symbol of Greek spirit, you could say. And outside of it, there's thousands of illegal immigrants selling illegal products, mock-ups of Louis Vuitton and Prada bags. So you can see how this new condition developed. At the same time, the more affluent classes start to gravitate towards the periphery and the monitored public spaces of the malls, which are, of course, introverted and based on consumption. So once the inner city public space starts to deteriorate, more affluent classes leave the center and move to the periphery, which is safer and controlled in a way. The mall is the largest mall in Athens, and it opens in 2005 along Attiki Odos, adjacent to Proastiakos, the suburban train, Neratiotis station. It provides 60,000 square meters of retail space and 200 stores, and in a way, it's a kind of network node in a way. In December 2008, the Golden Hall, Athens' most exclusive and glamorous mega shopping mall in the city periphery, is inaugurated. It was housed in the converted Olympic Games International Broadcasting Center, built in 2004. And here's another example of what I was saying before, that the mega objects of the Olympic Games somehow provided the shells for large spaces of consumption to appear. And these spaces could be shopping malls, could be concert halls, could be convention centers. And the population in the Mesogia Plain, and the Mesogia Plain is the side to the east, where the airport is down here. So the population in the east of Athens increases, while the population in the center of Athens and the Athens basin is reduced. So people move outside the center somehow. New and more generic forms of housing appear that offer identity. Once the city becomes more and more heterogeneous with different identities, people start to need to associate with a specific identity, and different housing types that were never present in Greece appear. Gated communities, branded housing development that somehow assign or associate the owner to a specific identity. Also, new forms of nature appear, the no-identity transitional landscapes, which are produced by the networks as leftovers and cover-ups. And so the highways, they produce these landscapes that are products of the networks, of the infrastructure somehow. And these are completely artificial landscapes which had never been available for us before, and could actually provide the opportunity for wonderful designs, which is not, of course, the case if you see these examples. In less than 2 decades, Greece transformed from a country exporting immigrants to the USA, to the United States, to Germany, to Australia, to Canada, to a country that is accepting immigrants. Approximately 70% of Athens' population was actually not born in Athens. A large part of them does not share religious practices or values. Homogeneous Athenian identity is fragmented into multiple micro-identities. And this is Muslims of Athens praying for the Ramadan. In December 2008, following the killing of a 15-year-old by the police, massive riots in the city center against corruption, consumers and over-policing, and in destruction of public space and private property. And this is the Christmas tree that was burnt in the main square of Athens. And these are images of destruction of banks. At that same week, the Golden Hall, Athens' most exclusive and glamorous mega shopping mall, opened its doors. So you can see this kind of schism or shift or dichotomy, I would say, between the center where riots and destruction takes place and the periphery where new shopping malls are actually inaugurated. Neglect of freely accessible public space, the dramatic demographic changes due to illegal immigration, and the rising social tensions transform the city's public space from a space of collectivity to a space of conflict. City center public space becomes a claimed space by the city's various heterogeneous groups, the protesters, that were actually the cover of the Time magazine for 2011, the protesters, the homeless, the ones that require or demand a new kind of environment for themselves. And this is a kind of self-designed park in the center of Athens, so alternative groups, and of course the far right that becomes more and more aggressive. So I would end up this kind of part of the lecture which had to do with Athens, summarizing that in a way, and this is something that's kind of an ongoing research and doesn't really apply directly to the architectural program. The last part does not really apply directly to the projects I will show, but I think it also relates to the research that we are actually developing in the studio at the master course. So diffusion, in a way, has led to a clear separation between city center and the periphery. So and this is an image from the right in the center, and this is the cover of Golden Hall magazine, showing a beautiful lady relaxing in a garden. So all this has to do with trying to say that Athens can become a kind of context, and a context is not an iconography or formal data for reproduction, but rather a reservoir of intelligence, or you can call it a landscape of intelligence. In a way, it's kind of data capable to inform or even determine the concept and the design of a project. A process of revealing, unearthing, or discovery is required. And you have, in order to use this context, you have to abstract it. And through its abstraction, the context becomes simultaneously global and local. So in a way, if you don't abstract it, then the reference is completely local. But once you abstract this context, then it has global qualities. It acquires global qualities. So the formless that I already discussed about deals with the non-dominance of a specific form, and in a way the relevance of extreme formalistic expressions. And in Athens, there's no reason of doing extreme formalistic expressions, because the city is so powerful that it actually consumes any extreme or formalistic expression. So we're talking about an abstract architecture that provides a kind of soft border or a dilution between private and public. And I think this is a very interesting conclusion. And even the polykatikia building is actually, through its balconies and through its setbacks and its semi-covered spaces, or the piloti, or the stoas, the whole language of the polykatikia is about this kind of soft border between private and public. So there's no specific border like in the northern European cities, where the facade is a kind of very specific, clear separation between private and public. Here, the border between private and public is actually something that is negotiated. It's a kind of soft border. So the second conclusion has to do with the borderless, the undesigned public space. And this, in a way, leads us to kind of to the use of unprogrammed or multi-programmatic platforms of activities, and the prominence of program as opposed to design, as opposed to form. So program is what actually generates the public space. And movement and vision are actually producers of space, have spatial dimensions, and create associations. And the notion of placeless, the notion that the city is actually replaces nature, and nature becomes fragments or islands, and these become their own microenvironments, have specific qualities and identities in a way. And the last kind of understanding of this context I have been talking about is that somehow the post-war architecture of the modern architecture of the post-war period, especially that of the polykatikia, can become actually a kind of modern tradition. You can use this architecture in order to work on it, reinterpret it, and produce a new architecture, which is completely new, but it's also based on the syntax of the pre-existing types. So pilotis, you know, of course, what it is. It's this kind of column space on the ground level. Balconies, semi-open spaces, setbacks in the top floors, and stoas become a language where one can, which one can reinterpret and end up with a new architecture in a way. So, so I end up with the third part of the lecture, which is these 13 projects I would like to show. I have divided them in two parts, as I said in the beginning, in 6 horizontal projects, which have to do mostly with landscape or public spaces, and 7 vertical projects, which are mostly building projects. But of course, you will see that there are some overlaps between the two categories in some projects where it's not very entirely clear whether it's a horizontal or vertical project. So the first project is a design we we did some time ago for Omonia Square in Athens. And Omonia was one of the squares included in the first, and the second and last master plan for Athens, designed by the Bavarian Leo von Klenze in 1834. It was part of the neoclassical triangle, and this is the location where Omonia is, and it was on the axis with the Acropolis. Oh, I'm sorry, it was on the axis with the Acropolis, and this triangle was only realized by 2/3. So the two of the three squares were actually realized. The third one was never realized. So Syntagma, which is the main square where the parliament stands, and it's in this location here. It was realized. This is where Omonia is, but it was realized as a kind of roundabout, as a kind of round square. And the third square was never realized. Omonia in the 60s took up a kind of very glamorous look. It became a kind of roundabout with a large fountain, and at night it was very kind of phantasmic. It was kind of very how would you say? It gave this impression of the kind of a booming city and a booming economy in the 60s. It was a sign of the new that would come. When in the 90s the works for the new metro started, the Omonia became a kind of building site, and it was decided that the roundabout would stop existing and it would become a kind of square joined to the sides of the streets. Omonia, as opposed to Syntagma, which was the other kind of very institutional square, is the square of the immigrants, the square of the working class. It's the square where all the people that have come from abroad in Athens buy their newspapers and discuss or meet in the different kiosks that surround the square. So we thought that this idea of information, of the kiosk for the working class and the immigrants would be a very interesting thing to combine together with a public space that would have to do with leisure. So in a way we came up with a scheme that is based on two platforms that are perpendicular one to the other. One is a platform that has to do with information, is a covered platform, and is aligned with linear kiosks that the immigrants or the different working class people could actually use for buying newspapers or discussing the news, and the other one would be a kind of open space for leisure, for recreation. And that's how these kind of two platforms, that one is perpendicular to the other, coexist. And we also kept a kind of reference to the pre-existing round shape, turning this into a kind of ellipsoidal shape with a piece that has to do with water, referring to the 60s design, and a kind of artificial landscape to the left, as you see. So this is the one platform of information that is covered and lined up with different kiosks that are kind of covered with newspapers and magazines from different places around the world. And the other open space is a kind of platform that has to do with movement of people and activities, and also celebrations, because Omonia is also used for when there's a big event, like a winning of a football match by the Greek team, or different other occasions. It's crowded and packed with people who go there and celebrate. So in a way, this project had to do with how movement and how these platforms coexist. The second project is from the same period somehow, and is located in Monastiraki, a square that was also a kind of site for the metro works, but is a very historically loaded site. It's down very close to the Acropolis, and it's kind of packed with different buildings from different historical periods of Athens. So this coexistence of different remnants from the history of Athens was something that interested us, together with the notion of movement that I talked about before. Here you can see the classical period, the Acropolis and the Parthenon. You can see the Byzantine period. There's this little monastery. You can see the Ottoman mosque. Here's the Roman agora. Here's the neoclassical station and the neoclassical buildings. And here you can see also the modern, kind of more commercial buildings of the post-war period. So in a way, you have a kind of overview of all the architecture of Athens if you look around. And again, a movement became the main element which would shape the project. So movement from the main streets into the railway station, which is here, the metro station, and towards the Acropolis, and divided the square into two parts. One is this area which we call the architectural platform, and one which is this area which is more like an area for recreation. And this architectural platform was an opportunity, as I said before, to use this specific location as a kind of viewing platform where one would actually see all these examples from the architectural history of Athens. While the other platform is a platform for relaxation and recreation under the trees. And again, these two different platforms separated by movement that connects the third project is a project we did for a library in Japan, and it was in a peripheral condition. It's a science. It's called Kansai Science City, and the program actually specified that half of the program was the book stacks, and the rest of the program were the reading rooms and circulation areas. So we thought that maybe instead of separating book stacks and reading rooms, it would be interesting to come up with an idea that would combine the two and create a kind of a mixed environment where one could actually coexist together with the book stacks. Our reference became these kind of archaeological sites where if you see how archaeologists work, they actually operate on a very kind of rigid and very geometric manner. They define lines and actually grids on top of the archaeological site, and they start digging. So in every case, they know where each finding is located. So somehow we're very seduced by the idea that one could actually, by going down into the library, you could actually find knowledge in a way. So this library became slowly a kind of archaeological site somehow, where one would move on top of the book stacks and go down into these carvings, into these spaces between them, in order to read or go to an auditorium. And this grid became the base of the library. So this is the final plan. The grid is the book stacks. They're everywhere. And the in-between spaces are the reading rooms. This is the large reading room. This is the small reading room. This is a kind of meeting place or a meeting room that they wanted for kind of public meetings. This is an auditorium, coffee shop, exhibition space, and rare book rooms and offices and different other facilities. So the library, in a way, becomes this kind of three-dimensional space of stacks, and the openings are the reading rooms and the other parts of the program. And this landscape, or this reference level, where one moves on top of the book stacks, is actually a huge landscape. And in order to locate yourself, we have used this kind of towers or totems of the different elevators that somehow take you down into the different rooms. So in order to locate yourself, you could use this kind of color coding in order to move around. And this is in the main reading room, where the book stacks would be behind these glass panels, and one would actually be able to look at the books but not touch them. So in a way, you'd have this kind of feeling of being within the books, but you would never be able to actually get hold of them, because actually the system of borrowing books or getting books is through a kind of specific machine that brings the books from the different stacks. A few years later, we entered the competition for for the Hellenic Metropolitan Park in Athens, which is a subject that still kind of haunts Athens. This is one of the major sites in Athens that have been discussed, and it seems that this discussion is never ending. When the decision to operate the new airport that I've already talked to you about was started, there was an agreement that once the new airport would open, the old airport would close down. So the old airport closed down, but no one really knew what would happen to the old airport. The government decided to turn this into a kind of metropolitan park, which is 1.5 times larger than Central Park. So you can imagine that Athens, a much smaller city than New York, would have a huge park, 1.5 times larger than that of New York. And we kind of examined the structure of this airport, and it was built in the 1930s when the area was a kind of rural or a kind of agrarian area. The system of the runways was overlaid on top, creating this image, for example. And then the city approached the airport, so the airport became part of the city. And it was only in the Olympic period when it was decided that since the airport was actually closed, the parts of the Olympic venues could actually be located there. So this clear structure of the runways was actually destroyed by the insertion or overlap of different Olympic stadia for baseball and hockey and different facilities that the Olympic Games require. So only part of this runway system was actually remained intact, while the other was destroyed, the one to the north. What we actually noted was that once the structure of the runways was overlaid on top of the natural environment, or the rural actually environment that was there, what remained in between in the runways was a kind of pre-existing natural environment. And that took us back to this idea of nature as islands that I had already discussed, which became a kind of fascination for us to research. So, as I said before, nature in the Greek city is a kind of residue or a leftover or an undesigned piece, and it becomes an island. And if this is the city, then the islands are what is left over within this city of the artificial. And then we examined the structure and what has to do with the airport terminal. And what is, in fact, an airport terminal? It's an apparatus or a machine that divides or sends different people to different locations. So you enter this kind of terminal, and you are located to different locations, different destinations. So if we could combine the two, the idea of nature as island and the idea of the airport as a terminal, then we could see this project as a terminal of nature. So we used, in a way, the existing runways, which were there and they were not destroyed, as a kind of infrastructure elements that would lead you to different locations. So the park somehow became a terminal of nature, as I said before. This is the one runway, and this is the first runway, and this is the second runway. So one could use these two runways to end up to different locations, different destinations, and these are the islands of nature. So these are the islands that have to do with water. Here are islands that have to do with cultivation and production and productive land. This is more dried area, and these are the islands that where the structure of the clear structure of the runways was destroyed because of the Olympic works, that have a kind of more peculiar and more irregular kind of shape, and where the structure of the runway has become curvilinear, and the topography has been somehow inserted in here. So this is a kind of more three-dimensional part of the park, and this is the more flat part of the park. And this is a kind of detail of how we're thinking of that this park would be organized. This is the first runway that is used for pedestrians, the second runway that is used for cars, because it's a huge park. You cannot really get there without a car. At that time, there was no metro that one could use to get there, and the islands that somehow offer different experiences. So, and these are some images that show this. This is in the area that is more deformed, more irregular, and you can have three-dimensional elements. This is the main alley for pedestrians, where the islands are on one side and the other. This is the island that has to do with water. It's a kind of beach. We call it the kind of Mediterranean pleasure island. And this is the runway, the second runway that has to do with a car. And it's a kind of linear parking that leads to the different islands again. Here, the ones that have to do with land as kind of productive land. We used this idea of islands in a project that we did a few years later, and for a city in the north of Greece. So we came up with a structure of islands that would be actually connected with a layer of or a network of circulation. And we thought that we would plant the whole park with the different trees. Some would be evergreen, that they would not lose their leaves during the winter. And actually the others would be deciduous that would that would lose the leaves, and in the winter the park would have a completely different image, and all the interior of the park would actually appear to the outside. So again, here is the same kind of structure where you have a circulation network that leads to different islands. Here they're more regulated, more rectangular, I would say. We call them islands. They are programmatic again, so the islands are programmatic. Some of them, they house buildings on top of them. Some remain squares or playgrounds or whatever. And once you set up this network of movement, of circulation, then you can join these platforms or these islands between them and move around. What is important for us, and I forgot to mention this in the previous project of the Hellenikon Park, is that once you set up this strategy in a way, then what is left over, this kind of gold or yellowish part, is not really very important. It could be anything in a way. So through this strategy, you don't really have to design everything. You only have to design the islands and the connection or the circulation between them, and then you can actually you don't have to care about the rest. And I think this for me is a very exciting idea, that you're not preoccupied in designing everything. And this is a model that we made showing these platforms / islands. This is a kind of flower garden. This is the main plaza or main square of the city, which has a kind of monumental dimension. There's a monument for the city. Then there's a kind of artificial landscape we built here. There's a playground for basketball. This is a kind of Kunsthalle, or a kind of art space for the city. This is a cafe area. This is an existing building that was there and had to be kept, and it's a kind of building for social events, and this is a kind of playground we proposed, and a little forest. So here you can see this structure. This is the main square with a monument. This is the playground. This is the red forest I mentioned before. This is the flower garden. So all these are these islands / platforms of the park. In Athens, in the summer, a lot of people, because it's very hot, prefer to use the open-air cinemas instead of going. Actually, the enclosed cinemas stop operating. Most of them stop operating, and people go out in open-air cinemas. But these open-air cinemas are kind of financially problematic, because the the fact that you still occupy a piece of land inside the city and you don't use it during the winter becomes a kind of problem in terms of money. So there was an idea that we could create an open-air cinema. This is an existing open-air cinema that was kind of abandoned. And we could create an open-air cinema that would have a kind of more, could have a dimension that would be used year-round. So it would have actually a kind of underground parking space with 3 stories for storing cars, parking cars. Would have some shops at the end, and on top some offices. So the idea was that we started researching the idea how we could use a kind of platform or a surface, deform it in a way that could become a screen for the cinema, an entrance for the parking, the underground parking, seating area for the spectators, for the ones who go to see a movie. And we started developing this idea, how this platform or this surface can be deformed or folded, you would say, in order to occupy or be suitable for all these programs. And we worked a lot with models, and we ended up with this proposal where this building would actually and you could enter the underground parking from here. Here you would start going up to the cinema, and there would be shops on the ground level. So in a way, it's a new, it's a kind of hybrid building that works for different programs and would have a kind of financial viability as opposed to what was now. And you would see here that this is the entrance for the underground parking. This is the screen. Here's the seating area for the open-air cinema. This is the entrance for the open-air cinema. You go up here. Here you would have office space, which could be accessed through this stair. And down here you would have stores on the ground level, on the level of the city. So it's and three levels of underground parking. This is a section. Okay. So now we go into the last part of the lecture, which has to do with these 7 vertical projects. The one is a very small project we did. It was a coffee bar in Athens a long time ago, in 1997. And we thought that the coffee bar could be an opportunity to negotiate the notion of limits or borders within the city. And we decided that this coffee bar would be actually approached as a kind of continuation of the urban landscape, as a part of the city. And we decided not to have any kind of facade. There was no windows, no glass panels, nothing. Only at night you would have this kind of garage door that would come down and close the coffee bar for the night. So in a way, this is an image with a lot of people and young people that use the coffee bar and expresses this idea of this space as a kind of continuation of the city, and where there's no real separation between the two. The second project is called Polymonokatikia, and it was an opportunity we were asked to design a polykatikia, which, as I mentioned before, is an apartment building, a multi-dwelling. The site was in an area where one could see polykatikias, but also monokatikias, monokatikias are the single-family houses, usually 1 or 2 stories high. And the opportunity was to kind of test how this type could be reinterpreted somehow. We soon found out that what was the advantage of the polykatikia was actually the views, the relation to the sky. The worst part of the polykatikia was actually the pilotis on the first floor, because no one wanted to live just above the street. And the pilotis, which was an interesting idea in the beginning, had actually developed into a kind of unused, usually dirty space that was used for parking. So it was something that we tried to avoid. On the other hand, we realized that the monokatikias, or the single-family houses, the big advantage of them was actually the relation or the anchoring somehow to the garden, to the ground. If you had a garden, this was what was really important for a single-family house. So we tried in a way to combine the two into a new kind of hybrid structure we named polymonokatikia, and which had the advantages of both types in a way. And then, of course, the question came, what would happen to the pilotis, this kind of ground level column space? And we thought that it would be a nice idea to elevate it to the first floor, which was the floor that no one really wanted. No one really wants to live on the first floor because you're not really on the ground and you're not really high up enough. So, so that's how the concept of the polymonokatikia came up. And this is some early sketches that show the development of this kind of elevated pilotis, which would actually separate the two types and become an entrance for the polykatikia, the upper part, which has to do with the apartments. And the section developed. So you can see here that this is the monokatikia, the single-family house, that is completely related to the garden. It's grounded to the garden. This is the polykatikia, which has three identical repetitive apartments, which was the kind of the case of all the modern polykatikias. They were this kind of repetition somehow of the same plan. And in between of them was this kind of elevated pilotis, which became this kind of entrance space for the polykatikia. And this is how it developed. This is the polykatikia on top with the white volume. The gray volume is the monokatikia, the single-family house. And this other metal structure has to do with circulation. It encloses a kind of elevator and staircase. And you see on this side there's a single-family house. Here there's a polykatikia with a pilotis, which is actually used as a parking space on the ground level. So that's what we try to avoid somehow. And here you can see the two types that coexist and the in-between space that occurs. And this is an image that shows how you actually reach the in-between level, where you can see that there are these windows which belong to the monokatikia, and they light up, and these skylights that bring light to the monokatikia. But this space is at the same time a kind of floor, but also a ceiling. Also, it's a pebble garden, but it is also a kind of entrance level. So it has this kind of duality to its use. And this is an image of the monokatikia, the ground, the single-family house. It has this mezzanine that could be used as a sleeping area, as a bedroom. And downstairs is the common spaces. This is the plan. This is the staircase, and this is the apartments on top of the top floor apartment, which has the views that I was talking about. Third project is a project that there was a kind of competition, but also an exhibition. It was called Invisible Hotel, and we were asked to design an invisible hotel. We also had to somehow interpret what invisibility actually means. Through different sketches and research, we thought that invisible would actually mean that there was no facade to it. One could not see it from the street level. And it would actually have no views. So it was more like a hidden space or a hidden location. So it would be a kind of hidden hotel. And we tested the idea of putting this hotel beside the buildings that define the urban block, inside the void of the urban blocks. In order that this building would not become an object by itself, we thought that it would be interesting to form or to produce the building as a kind of offset of the perimeter, of the inside perimeter of the urban void. And while sketching the notion of views and the location of where you are once you don't have a facade, once you don't have a view, came up. And in this sketch already there are these kind of telescopes that start to appear in the search for views. And of course there was this kind of fascination we had to the significant, in my view, project by Le Corbusier. It's the Atelier Bestegui in Paris, where you have, you probably know this project. This central image is very well known. Le Corbusier had done this, this penthouse, this top floor apartment for a strange celebrity person, Mr. Bestegui. And what he had actually offered him was that he would not be able to see the views from his apartment. You see, the Arc de Triomphe is only partly or very partly visible. What Le Corbusier actually offered to Bestegui was a kind of mechanism of a periscope, which is here, and you can see it up here as well, through which he would actually be able to see the monuments of Paris. So in a way, technology became a kind of instrument that would provide a solution to the problem of lack. While when you don't have the ability to have something, technology could actually provide and cover this need. So, so the invisible hotel becomes a kind of offset, as I said, of the interior perimeter of the urban void, and these big antennas or these big telescopes provide views to these apartments, which are not really kind of hidden somehow. And these are some images that somehow show this this hotel. The hotel was actually made up of different, we call them bases. They were kind of units, I would say, which were 4 stories high. And one would actually move through the stories through kind of programmatic platforms. You can see here this kind of telescopic or hydraulic platform that you would use to move from one level to the other. And these platforms were programmatic. One could be, we called it a garden, and it could be a setting for a couple, perhaps, in love, or, but we could also have a kind of more family platform if you had kids, or if you were a kind of sports fan or athletic guy, you could use this kind of more sports platform. So these platforms that you use to move up and down in your kind of unit were actually programmatic and depending on your interests and your inclinations. But since there was no view inside there, in this kind of invisible hotel, all views were provided through machinery, through projections, as you can see. And these projections could be movies, could be television, but they could also be artificial views. You could have a view of the Acropolis, which is very expensive in Athens. And an Acropolis view is the most expensive view you could get in a hotel. But it could actually be artificial. So you could see the Acropolis, but it would actually be an image. And in the only level where one could actually meet the other people that lived in this hotel was this level of the restaurant or the cafe. But you would not really see inside the room, so you don't see anything else. Instead, you would only see the projections that these people are actually seeing behind in their own units or in their own bedrooms or in their own living room. So here you have an image of a view of the Acropolis. Here's a TV show. Here's a movie, another TV show. So this was a kind of comment, I would say, that in a contemporary world where people actually mediate through technology and through images, you would actually meet the one who kind of lives next to you by looking at what he's looking. And so in a way, depending on what he sees, you understand somehow who he is, or who or she is. So it was a kind of comment on this kind of mediation through imagery. And on the top floor, you could have a kind of sun deck, and you could operate the telescopic camera that could change or provide different views for your unit. And this is the image, this is the facade of the invisible hotel. This is because in the street you would only see these kind of red antennas searching for different points of interest. Fourth project is an office building in Athens, 2007. And this was a kind of continuation from the polykatikia, or polymonokatikia, and it included some of the understandings that we had already acquired through our work in the polymonokatikia. But here it's a building, it's an office building, so it's not an apartment. What we came up with was that in an office building you have these spaces where people work, so it's the working areas, and you have these spaces of movement. And the spaces where people, the people who work in the office meet with other people, so meeting rooms, for example. And it's in a Greek climate where there's too much light. It's actually better if the openings of a working space are not that big. And so the working area became this area which is more enclosed, more solid on both sides, while the area of circulation and meeting rooms became this kind of more extrovert, more open, more transparent part of the building. So the building has this kind of two subparts, and these big balconies somehow relate the building to the big avenue that is in front, where cars run with high speeds, but also becomes a kind of element, as a kind of public element of the building, where people could, employees could go out to smoke or meet or chat. And they could also provide some kind of shading for the spaces below. Here we incorporate some of the readings of the polymonokatikia. So there is a kind of pilotis level again, which is elevated from the ground. These big balconies create this public space of the building, as I said. The building has a kind of H shape in order to maximize the surface of windows and openings it has. You go up into this kind of pilotis space, and here we rework the idea of the pebble garden and the skylights. And the pebble garden is no more a garden that is where the pebbles are kind of loose, but it becomes a kind of terrazzo, and it has this kind of feeling of a kind of frozen somehow seaside or frozen beach somehow. That provides a kind of serenity, a feeling of serenity once you enter or once you leave the building. The building has also two big sunken courtyards that provide light to two big meeting rooms that are kind of placed on the first basement somehow. This is the entrance space. And we decided to put all the circulation along the facade in order to kind of expose it, to expose all the circulation of the building. So here is there's one layer that has to do with the balconies. This is the layer of circulation and movement in the building. And just behind here is the layer of the small meeting rooms. So and all the staircases were done with metal grating, so we could provide visibility and transparency. And here's the small meeting rooms, just beside the movement, the area where the staircases are. So you have a kind of parallel placement of the different elements. So here you can see that. There's the balcony, there's the staircase, and there's the small meeting rooms, and all these are working areas, and inside is the kind of elevators and facilities, different facilities. And this is the top floor, which is a kind of setback, again as a kind of reference to the polykatikia structure with the setback and the retire, the offices of the executives, and where on the top floor you get all this the kind of best view of the city. In 2007, we were asked to design a loft, an apartment actually, in a 1960s building in Athens. That was a kind of commercial architecture of the 60s, without any interest. And the task was to design a kind of maximum flexibility apartment, which could be used by anyone, independent of their independent of any specificity. We tried to see, to research what this kind of maximum flexibility would mean, and we thought that the only part of an apartment that is not really flexible is the wet areas, the area of the showers, of the toilets, and of the kitchen. You can't really move them around. So we decided that all this area that has to do with wet facilities should be placed along the wall, separating wall between the two buildings. So we placed showers, toilets, and kitchen along this wall, and then we turned the different bedrooms into objects somehow that could be moved around. So the bedroom can become a kind of movable furniture in a way, which could be enclosed or be completely visible, and could differentiate and could be placed in different configurations within the plan. So that was how it developed, and on here you would have all this wet area, while the movable bedrooms could actually be could either be open or could be enclosed by glass or other materials, in order to provide more or less privacy. We also tried to test the facade. What do you do with a building that has really an ugly facade, or a facade that has really no interest? And we came up with an idea that you could cover this facade with a kind of light metal structure that could be perforated. And here the reference was to a kind of folded fabric somehow that created shades of different intensity. And this facade could somehow be broken down into different alternatives, either through the use of garage doors or sliding panels, folding panels or sliding panels that could become something that could offer us kind of interesting facade. In 2006, we set up a network which was called Athens 9 for the research on the urban transformations of Athens. And as the name says, it was made up of 9 offices of architects in Athens that would produce projects for the contemporary city. And at that time, I had this. It was a time where Athens was expanding more and more, as I already explained, to the east and to the west of its borders. So I was very much intrigued in designing something that had to do with the expanding city, the diffuse city. So I selected a location that had to do, well, there was along Attiki Odos, this kind of ring road or peripheric that I mentioned before, which is this yellow line, and cuts actually through this kind of agrarian or rural somehow environment, or rural, the kind of fields of Mesogia, which is here, and finally ends up to the new airport. And it looks somehow like this. So this is the highway that cuts through the fields. And this is an image of this highway. It's a kind of highway that leads to it's like conquering the West somehow. And the environment, the natural environment is very nice. It's very seductive. It's all covered with olive trees, olive groves, and vineyards. So it was very interesting to work with this. And then we came up with an idea that somehow, once we were out of the Athens basin and the relationship somehow with the Acropolis, which has always been a kind of reference point for every architecture in Athens, and I didn't mention this, but in Athens there are very few tall buildings, which has to do with the fact that no building should actually be somehow challenging the Acropolis. But however, there are a few buildings that are higher than the regular 6 or 7-story ones. And if you trace back to the architectural history of Athens, you would actually see that each time that the city expands, there is always a tall building that somehow defines the edge of the city at the different periods. So, for example, this building here, and this is an image from the center of Athens looking north somehow. So here you can see this building, which is a 70s building on the right, and then there's another one which is mid-70s and late 70s. So in a way, as the city expands, different tall buildings become somehow landmarks or signs of this kind of expansion. And the city moves ahead and covers or incorporates these buildings into the urban mass, and they become less important somehow. So that's how the idea of the ephemeral borders came up. So how could we design something that would be, in a way, on the edge or on the border at this specific time, but would actually eventually, as the city would expand, be incorporated into the mass of the city. So that's how the title came, ephemeral borders. So there are borders of a condition that is somehow of the present, but it would actually disappear in the future. And the fact that we could design something that it was outside of the Athens basin and not in any way related to the Acropolis could actually provide to us the opportunity to test higher buildings instead of the 5 or 6-story ones. And also, as a comment on the rising consumerist culture that had already developed at that time, that's the end of the first decade of the 21st century. We were inclined somehow to test a kind of hybrid building that would incorporate or where in this hybrid building you could have at the same time housing and consumption programs. So how would it be if you lived within a shopping mall? How would it be if you lived within in a building that had to do with consumption? And here's a plan of this. So you see that this is the landscape. This is the lines of the vineyards. This is the lines of the olive grove. This is the Attiki Odos, the highway. And so the buildings, these slim towers, they actually are placed along the highway at wide intervals in order to be understood or perceived by someone who moves along the highway with a high speed. So because one is actually moving within a car. And that's how we started to think about these buildings. And the orange part would actually be a more solid part, which was the housing area. And the kind of more transparent one would be this kind of consumption uses. And we developed this facade. There is a kind of specific rhythm that allows you to, once you move fast, to understand this, the successive presence of these towers. And this is a tower that has some kind of common facilities. And this is the entrance, for example, to one of these towers. The idea was that you would enter to your house or to your apartment through the same way that one would enter the supermarket, or you would park your own car in the parking lot of the supermarket. So it would be a kind of mix somehow, a kind of mix between privacy and being exposed to this kind of movement of people that are there for a while only. And since all these people who would live there would be there would have a kind of very fast life. It's not a place for families, I guess. It's a place that is related to the networks. It could provide the fast accessibility to the highway and the airport. Places where people could mingle or could interact somehow had to be provided. This could be working out spaces like gyms, or a place of contact that we call, which could be a kind of lounge and library where people could actually meet in this kind of fast or limited time they had, and they kind of coexisted in these ephemeral borders. And of course there could be a kind of rooftop landscape where one could use to hang out or sunbathe during a nice day. The structure of the towers themselves was also somehow very minimal and provided large balconies to the highway that could offer nice views. And as a kind of comment to this kind of fast life of consumerist lifestyle, we thought that the elevators inside the different apartments could be actually made out of translucent glass. So people would actually move around and you would get glimpses somehow of your neighbors coming up or going down, while you would never actually realize who they are or actually recognize them. So in a way, it was a kind of cynical comment, I would say, on this kind of consumerist lifestyle or consumerist culture that was developing at that time in Athens. And a reference to this kind of flickering images of the TV that somehow offers us companion once we're alone at home, and we feel that we are kind of in the coexisting with other people, even though it's just this kind of flickering images. So this would be the final image of this project. So the last project is a project that we worked on for the last, I would say, 9 months. Together with Hellenikon, the old airport, is a kind of major part of Athens. I think Eleonas is the biggest opportunity for Athens. Of course, maybe it will not happen immediately, but after the economy starts to catch up. It's an area that is huge and is to the west of the city center. You can see it's just here. This is the Athens basin, and defined by the mountains. This is the airport here, and it's actually a network node because it's located along all the major circulation and axis. So this is Tikiodos on here, the new highway. This is the national highway here. This is the port of Piraeus. So you can see how very important the location of this area is. And as most of the center of Athens, it has witnessed a shrinking population in the last 20 years. As opposed to the east of Athens, as I already explained, that witnessed increasing population. Until the mid 19th century, it was still an olive grove, and you can see this gravure by Bavarian painter Friedrich Stademann, which shows he sits on the rock of the Acropolis, and he draws this image. He's looking towards the west. And you can see that the olive grove is still existing there. It's a huge olive grove that was fertile, and because of underground waters that existed in the area. In the 1920s, the city had already expanded towards this area, and it's already the different buildings, manufacturing, and different buildings had already started to replace the olive grove. So the olive grove was already becoming extinct before the Second World War. Here you can see this area. This is the center of Athens. This is the Acropolis here, and this is the Philopos Hill, and this is Lykabetus, another hill. And you can see that Eleonas is this area here. You can see how different the structure of the urban fabric is. While the typical Athenian urban block has this scale, you see that the scale of this area is much larger. So it's completely visible from this satellite image. And you can see how close it is to the city center. This area, in a way, is a kind of post-industrial landscape where different manufacturing units were located, transportation companies exist, some light industry, And now it's in a kind of state of environmental decline, and there are many empty lots. This is an image from the area. Some of the lots are empty. In a way, it's a kind of terrain vague, you could say. On the back, you can see the Acropolis. So the Acropolis is actually visible from some parts of the area and becomes the only landmark. It's very difficult to navigate yourself in this area because there are no landmarks, and the circulation network is actually completely irrational. There's no grid, and a lot of the streets actually end up as dead ends. Inside the area, there's a major natural element, which is the stream of Prophet Daniel, which is a kind of open stream. It's one of the streams, side streams or substreams of one of the main rivers of Athens, of river Kifissos, but it's actually used as a kind of dump space for garbage. And you can see that it's actually a kind of open sewage. On the other hand, in the area, there are still some remnants or some fragments, you would say, of the Attic landscape, which is very significant. And on top, you can see that this is a fragment of an olive grove, which was the case for the entire area until the end of the 19th century. And there's also, still there are different fragments of vegetable gardens, which were there existent until the Second World War, and would provide vegetables for the city. So in a way, it's a very peculiar, very complex landscape. There are also many fenced areas where you cannot really see what's inside. Some of them are used as parkings. Some of them are used as areas for transportation companies. But there's also large objects of consumption. This kind of Cineplex and shopping mall, this kind of leisure park, the ubiquitous IKEA big box is also one of the elements that one can meet in the area. So we tested different scenarios. What we could do with this area. One was one scenario. The first one was, we called it agrarian, and it was a kind of more minimal scenario. I will not go into much detail now, which had to do mainly with the reconstruction of the stream and the different areas that could be used as kind of parks or small green areas, and the implantation of more housing units. Of course, this scenario had the problem that all this development had to be funded by public money, because no one would pay for green areas, no one would pay for housing. So it was not really financially viable at a state of crisis. The second scenario was, we called it urban agrarian, and we thought it was, we selected this because we thought it combined the qualities of the previous one. So it had, there was an investment, or there was paying attention to the upgrading or reconstruction of the natural elements, the river, the different green areas, but it would also provide for elements of tertiary, of the tertiary sector, and for commercial elements that could actually raise income and make the area, the project more viable. And we also tested the kind of third, more extreme scenario. We called it metropolitan, which was a kind of maximization of the development of the area. We approached this as a kind of a new downtown for Athens, but we were convinced that this scenario, this kind of metropolitan scenario, was not really viable for this period of the time and for the economy of the city and the country as a total. So we went ahead with the second one, which was the urban agrarian scenario. We had to come up with an idea of how the master plan would be organized, and we found that we could structure our idea, our concept, on two axes. One was this kind of linear, straight linear street that would run through the entire area, and the other one was the curvilinear axis of the stream. I don't know if you can see that, but we overlaid a kind of a big grid on top of this area. And once we overlaid this area, we provided for a big linear olive grove. We thought we kind of recreate the olive grove to a certain degree, recreate the olive grove of antiquity or of the past, and we could provide as well as different fields for cultivation, combined with low height housing. I would like to mention also that the stream of Prophet Daniel actually ends up here. It's an open air stream, and ends up here in the archaeological site of Plato's Academy. It's where Plato used to teach in antiquity, and this is a site that is now under development and reconstruction, and it would end up to the south in this area, which is a kind of modern development. It's the vegetable market of Athens, and we propose that this becomes a kind of green expo, a place where one could use as a park / exhibition space. So in order not to be too tiring for you, I would say that then we started putting some buildings along this main street that we had developed. And here the idea of these slim towers that I have explained before in the ephemeral borders came up again. So we thought that these towers, we could redevelop them or reuse them once again. And these towers could actually be combined with what we call housing type 1, which is this kind of low or carpet housing. A housing that is 1 or 2 or 3 stories high and is related to agricultural or to green areas. And we also, in order to somehow expand into the area, we also provided for housing type 2, which is this kind of more courtyard-based types, which refer to what I showed before, these kind of fenced activities, these activities that you don't see what's inside, but it's more like it's a kind of wall, it's a kind of fort. And these islands could actually operate as stimulators for the expansion of the area. So this is a kind of axonometric of this main part along the street, the high-rise buildings. This is a soccer field, a soccer stadium that is supposed to be there, and a shopping mall, a big tertiary sector building, which is a kind of scaled-down reconstruction of a convention center that Mies van der Rohe had done for Chicago, but it was never built, and different other buildings, which I'm not going into now. This is an exploded axonometric which shows all these buildings, the towers, the carpet housing, the courtyard housing, this kind of more fort-like housing, and the big elements, the soccer stadium, the mall, the tertiary sector building. This is a kind of intercity bus station and other facilities. And this is an elevation of how these towers would look along this main street. And this is the master plan. And again, a kind of bird's eye view from northwest. And you can see how close it is to the sea and to the major networks. This is the national highway here. This is the main street that leads into the center of Athens. This is the Acropolis here. So you can see how close this area is. And it remains in this kind of very decadent state right now. And I will end up with some images. This is how we would imagine the stream of Prophet Daniel to become a kind of a public promenade where one could sit and relax. And this is a view from the main street, the main axis, which is also approached or accessed by light rail or tram facilities. and the linear olive grove in front of the towers, and in the back you have this glimpse of the Acropolis. And this is the last image. It's the project. If you look from the looking to the west, where you can see the carpet housing, this low housing, and the different cultivations that are combined with these polyprogrammatic towers that include housing, but also offices and commerce. So I thank you.
It's a long lecture. I don't know if there is some questions before we leave. I'm sure that most of you are working in the MRCUD, and if there is some question.